If you're serious about straight line performance in your 2015 and newer non-MagneRide Mustang, well then you might want to consider a set of the BMR drag springs that we have here today. Now the BMR options will offer a unique drop of 1.2 inches up front and a ½ inch drop in the rear, making for that classic muscle car stance, while the linear spring rates will be spec'd in a way to help get your car to squat and leave the line better, equating to better launches and better 60-foot times. Now BMR is without a doubt one of the premier aftermarket suspension companies for late model Mustangs, and they exist to make your Mustang handle or launch better than ever. Now the launch portion is really what we're focused in on here today, as these springs are designed to get your S550 out of the hole quicker and better than before. Now BMR attacks this or makes this possible through two different fronts. First and foremost, they use what is called a linear spring rate, which is going to remain constant and consistent throughout the entire compression cycle. Now that's unlike that of a progressive spring, which gets progressively firmer through compression, and that varying spring rate can make consistent, repeatable performance just a little bit more challenging. Now, knowing this, BMR and other manufacturers for that matter typically go with a linear spring rate for more consistency in racing or performance applications. Now, speaking of that spring rate, you're going to be looking at a combination of a 150-pound spring rate for the front here and a beefy 800-pound spring rate for the rear, which really is a dead giveaway that these springs are designed specifically for drag use. Why? Well, because you really like to see that lighter spring rate for the front here to help promote that weight transfer to the rear of the car when launching, to help get you that traction you need. And this is really important on a car like the S550 with the IRS, of course, where a little bit of squat is never a bad thing. Now, secondly, here with the BMR drag springs, the drop that these springs deliver is going to help that 60-foot performance as well, thanks to the slightly bigger drop up front. Again, you're looking at just over an inch up front compared to only a ½ inch in the rear, which is gonna deliver that total kind of nose down dragster look, but one that also serves a purpose to help transfer that weight we keep talking about. Now, on top of that, I think it just makes for a very tough look, and one that, in my opinion, will allow for plenty of room for a big drag radial or slick in the rear. Now, moving into construction here, guys, I do want to mention that the drag springs from BMR are produced here in the USA, in fact, down in Florida. They're going to be met with the same testing and manufacturing requirements as the rest of their spring lineup, and that does include things like the cold wound CNC winding process, high temp stress relieving, and shot peening, which does allow the company to back every spring that they produce with their lifetime warranty against sag. As you can see, they are also finished off in this bright red signature powder coat from BMR, and that will help prevent any corrosion over time. Price point for the drag springs from BMR will land around the low $300 ballpark, give or take, which certainly puts these in line with other more premium spring options from companies like Eibach and Ford Performance. But now we want to segue into our installation portion of today's video, show you what it takes to get these springs installed on your ride at home. Now the site's going to go soft 3 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter here, taking you about 4 hours at most to complete from start to finish, depending on your level of expertise. But now to give you a better idea of how this one might go down in the shop, garage, or driveway, let's throw it out to our guys in the shop for a detailed walkthrough and tool breakdown.
The tools you'll need for this project are an impact gun, a 10, a 13, a 15, an 18, a 21, and a 24 millimeter socket, a 6 millimeter Allen head, an 18 millimeter wrench, a ball peen hammer, tape measure, a Sharpie, a utility knife, a trim panel removal tool, a long pry bar, a caliper hanging tool, and a long ½ inch extension. Hi everyone, today we're installing a set of lowering springs on our Mustang. So let's get started with the uninstall of the stock springs first. So the first thing we need to do before we start taking anything apart is making sure that everything is properly supported. If you're doing this on the ground, then you need to make sure that the car itself is supported on a set of jack stands. And you also are going to need a couple of floor jacks. Now we're using pole jacks on ours just because of the fact we're on a lift. But if you're doing this on the ground, you will need a couple of floor jacks because you're going to need to support the cradle for the rear diff to keep it from falling out of the car. And to do that, there's a couple of spots right behind the control arm where you can put your floor jacks to hold that up. Now, that being said, let's go ahead and start taking this apart. We'll disconnect our brake lines first, and then we'll start taking things apart. So first thing we're going to do is disconnect our brake hose up here using a 13mm socket, and then we'll disconnect the brake line here using a 10mm socket. Now we'll disconnect the sway bar end link from the lower control arm using an 18mm wrench and a 6mm Allen wrench. And we'll push that out of the way. Next thing we're going to do is remove our two lower shock mount bolts using our 15mm socket. Now we'll remove our two upper shock mount bolts using an 18mm socket and then take our shock out. All right, now we're going to remove these two 13mm bolts here and here before we can actually remove the bolts holding our cradle up. So using our 13mm socket, now this is the point where you really need to make sure that you've got your support underneath the cradle for the diff so that we can go ahead and remove the bolts that hold the cradle to the body. So we're going to be using a 21mm socket to remove this bolt, and we're going to do this one at a time. We've got 4 bolts to do, 2 on each side of the vehicle. So we're going to take this one out, and then we're going to put it back in, and we're going to twist it in about 4 or 5 threads just to make sure that it's strong enough to hold the cradle when we lower it down. So let's go ahead and take this out, and we'll put it back in, like I said, about 4 or 5 threads, and then we'll move on to the next one. Now we're going to put our bolt back in. Like I said, about 4 or 5 threads, and now we'll go ahead and do the rear bolt. Now for this one, you're also going to need a long extension, and it's right in front of the exhaust pipe here, so we'll go ahead and take this out. And then we'll put it back in, just like we did the front one. Now you can repeat this process, removing the front bracket and removing the bolts and putting them back in about 4 or 5 threads for the other side. All right, now that we've got our bolts put back in and they're secure enough to hold the cradle, we'll start lowering down the cradle to the point where it's actually resting on those bolts now. So we'll go ahead and lower ours down. And as you can see, the cradle's coming down and it will sit on the bolts. All right, once all the tension is released, then you can stop. You can leave the jack under there just to make sure that it's an added safety support. So once we've got this lowered on both sides, now we can go ahead and start working on getting our spring out. Now occasionally, like what we have here, when you lower everything down, the spring still doesn't want to come out. So we have to get a little creative with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to raise this side of the cradle back up, remove our 2 bolts on this side, and then slowly lower the cradle down enough to free that spring up. So we'll go ahead and raise this up, and this is why it's so critical that you make sure that you've got proper support under the cradle. So we'll raise that up a little bit. Remove the 2 bolts on this side. And then we'll slowly lower our cradle down on this side only till we can get that spring free. See, our spring is starting to drop here. So we'll drop it a little bit lower. Then what we'll do is we'll use a long pry bar in this opening on the lower control arm to pry that down. Pull our spring forward and get it right out. All right, we will be reusing the OEM isolators for the springs, so you want to make sure that when you put it in, you've got this stop area right here on the isolator. That goes at the end of the spring. So we'll go ahead and get that set in place, set the isolator in, and you also want to make sure that the logo is facing right side up and not upside down. Now we can go ahead and install this and get things put back together. And you also want to make sure that the end of this coil matches the stop in the lower isolator. Now you may need your pry bar to help lower that control arm. And you may also need to lower the cradle just a tad more. All right, now we can raise our cradle up to get our bolt started. Now you don't want to tighten this one up until you get your two 13mm bolts in the front of that bracket. Now you can repeat this whole process for the other side. That way when we start putting things back together, we just tighten it all up at one time. All right, so underneath this dust cover here on the shock is a bump stop. Now because of the springs that we're putting in here are so much shorter than the stock springs, we need to shave off about 5/8 of an inch off the bottom of the bump stop. So to do that, what we're gonna do is remove the top of the shock here, pull the dust boot off, get access to our bump stop, and we'll go ahead and cut that down. So to take this off, we're gonna use a flathead screwdriver, slide it underneath the cap, and just pry it off. Once we've got that done, we can use our 15mm socket and go ahead and remove this nut. Once you've got the nut removed, slide the top off. Pull your dust boot off. All right, so what you're gonna wanna do is you want to cut about 5/8 of an inch off of the bottom of this bump stop here, because it is going to compress it more with those new springs on. Now because of the fact that we're putting our vehicle back to stock condition, we're not actually going to cut our bump stop, but I will show you how to do it. So we've got an extra one here off to the side, and as you can see, I've already got a black line marked around it. So it's, like I said, we've got our line already drawn on here at the 5/8 mark, and basically all you're doing is removing this bottom bump here. So all you need is a utility knife, razor blade, and what you're gonna do is just go ahead and cut along your line that you've marked. Go all the way around. Until you've got that bottom edge cut off. Now you can go ahead and put this back on your shock put the dust cover back over it, and now we're ready to reinstall our shock on the vehicle. All right, so now we've got our bump stop and our dust cover back on. We'll put our top back on the shock. Put our nut on and tighten it back down with our 15mm socket. And now we can go put it back on our vehicle. Now we'll go ahead and install our shock. Using the original bolts, we'll go ahead and get that locked into place. And we'll tighten those down with our 15mm socket. Now we'll go ahead and raise our cradle up so we can get our upper shock mount bolts aligned. And we'll tighten them down with our 18mm socket. Now we'll go ahead and finish raising up our cradle and tighten down our bolts. We'll tighten down our 13mm first. And then our two 21mm. And we'll go ahead and reattach our sway bar link. And we'll tighten that down with our 18mm wrench and our 6mm Allen wrench. Now we'll reconnect our brake lines. And we'll tighten them down with our 13mm up top and our 10mm at the bottom. And now you can repeat that whole process for the other side. Now to uninstall our front strut, first thing we're going to do is remove our brake caliper and rotor. To do that, we're going to need a 15mm socket, and we've got two bolts behind here that hold our caliper to our knuckle. So we're going to go ahead and take those off first. We'll hang our caliper up to prevent any damage to the brake hose itself. Slide the rotor off just to get it out of the way. And then once we get that off, then we'll go ahead and disconnect our brake line hoses here. And then remove our 18mm bolt for our sway bar link. Like I said, we'll remove our caliper bolts first. And we pull that off, and you can see here's where the two bolts go, and they attach to the back of the knuckle. So then we just hang this up, get it out of the way. And go ahead and pull our rotor off. Now we'll remove our sway bar end link here. And when we take this off, it's a good idea to go ahead and do the other side as well. That way when it goes back up, everything will be able to fit into place like it's supposed to. Get that out of the way. We'll put the nut back on there, just make sure we don't lose it. Now we'll use our trim panel removal tool to disconnect our ABS line from the strut. Just pop that in underneath and pry it out. And there's one more down behind the dust shield here. Now we've got that out of the way. Now we can go ahead and remove the two nuts that hold our knuckle to our strut. We use a 24mm socket to remove those. Now you don't want to take these all the way off. You just want to go to the end of the bolt itself, because we're going to have to drive these out because the bolts themselves are splined into the knuckle itself. So now we use our hammer. Like I said, make sure that they're even. Now we're going to push inward on the strut here just to relieve the tension on these bolts so we can go ahead and pull them out. We'll start with the top one first. And with those out of the way, now we can go ahead and remove the three nuts at the top of the strut and go ahead and take this out. Now here's our three nuts at the top of the strut, so we'll go ahead and remove two of them. And then before we remove the third one, we'll just grab a hold of our strut to keep it from falling out. And now we can take our strut over to our spring compressor so that we can compress this spring and separate it from the strut and put our new spring in. All right, as you can see, we've already got our strut in our spring compressor, so now we just need to go ahead and compress our spring so that we remove this top nut here on the strut. And to do that, we're going to be using a 13/16 pass-through socket along with a 10mm socket to hold the stud still while we remove the nut. So we'll go ahead and compress our spring just to take the tension off of the nut. Now we'll use our special 13/16 pass-through socket and a 10mm socket that goes down in the middle of it to hold the shaft still. Now, just like what we did for the rear, we are going to have to cut our bump stop here because the spring is going to be shorter. So we're only going to cut 3/8 of an inch off the end of this one. That way it'll operate the way that we want it to operate. Now, we're not actually going to cut ours this time. We're just going to go ahead and put it back on for the purposes of this video because we will be returning our car back to stock form. So as you can see, we've already got our spring compressed with our top hat on top. Now we can go ahead and insert our strut up through the bottom. Now you want to make sure when you put your spring on, now you want to make sure that the logo is right side up so that you can actually read it. That'll give you the correct spring orientation. You also want to make sure that the stud that has the sticker on it, if you're reusing your factory top hat, actually is towards the front, and that's going to line up with your mounting points here on the strut. So you want to make sure that that front stud is actually lined up somewhere in this vicinity here at the mounting point for the lower strut. That way, when you go to put it on, everything goes in nice and easy. So let's go ahead and put this back together. Now you want to make sure that the end of the coil spring at the bottom also lines up with the stop on your isolator. And we'll just tighten up our nut. using our 13/16 pass-through socket and our 10mm socket to hold the shaft still. Now we can go ahead and uncompress our spring and get this thing ready to put back on the car. All right, now we're going to go ahead and put our strut back in where it came from, and we'll loosely attach our 3 nuts at the top while we reconnect everything at the bottom. All right, now we go ahead and insert our lower strut mount bolts. Now they're not going to go all the way in because of the splines on the end of it, but we'll get them in far enough so that we can put the nut on the other end and then tighten it down, and that'll pull the bolt through. All right, now we'll go ahead and put our nuts onto our bolts. And tighten them down with our 24mm socket. All right, now we'll put our rotor and caliper back on. Reattach our caliper using our original hardware. And we'll tighten them down with our 15mm socket. Now we'll go ahead and reconnect our ABS lines to our strut. All right, now at this point, go ahead and repeat this whole process for the other side. And then after you get the other side done, then we can go ahead and reconnect our sway bar end links. So we'll go ahead and slide this through, attach our nut, and tighten it down with our 18mm socket. And finally, we'll tighten down our 3 15mm nuts on the top of our strut. All right, now that we've got everything back together, now we can torque everything down to manufacturer's recommended specifications, put your wheels and tires back on it, and immediately take it to your alignment shop before you drive it on the road.
And that wraps up our review and install of the BMR front and rear lowering springs drag version in red for your 15
And a newer
Mustang without MagneRide. Thanks for watching, and remember, for all things Mustang, keep it right here at AmericanMuscle.com.